Hello and welcome. On quiet nights, long ago, people shared stories filled with magic, trials, fear, and hope. Each tale opened a doorway into another world, where imagination shines and lessons echo across the ages. Tonight, we step into that timeless realm together. Lean Lisa. There once lived a woman named Lisa, and she was leaner than most, for she scarcely allowed herself rest or ease. Unlike lazy Harry, who would sooner sleep upon a bench than raise a hand to labor, or Fat Trina, who thought nothing in the world so sweet as to sit at table and eat. Lisa was restless, quick, and sharp of tongue. She believed that nothing should be still. Not the broom, not the pot, not her husband, and certainly not herself. From the first glimmer of dawn until the last light of dusk, she bustled about the cottage. She scoured and scraped and scolded and swept. And when there was nothing left to clean, she scrubbed again, until the very boards seemed worn thin by her zeal. Her hands were rough with ashes, for she used them more than water. And the smell of burnt cinders clung to her hair and gown as if it were her only garment. Now her husband, Long Lawrence, was a tall, bony fellow, patient by nature, but bent beneath the weight of her demands. Whatever task she laid upon him, he must carry. And she gave him so many that he bore more burdens than an ass loaded with 3 full sacks of grain. Yet all their toil brought little fruit. They had no gold, nor field, nor cow, nor pig, nor even a chicken to boast of. For all her ceaseless labor, Lisa and Lawrence were poor as beggars, and their table remained bare. One night, when the day had wrung them both dry, and even the crickets were weary of chirping, they lay side by side in their bed of straw. Lawrence was heavy with sleep, but Lisa, whose thoughts never rested, turned and twisted and would not be silent. At last she thrust her sharp elbow into her husband's ribs and said, "Lens, dost thou hear me? I have had a thought that will change our fortune if thou wilt but listen." Lawrence groaned and pulled the blanket over his head, but she tugged it down again. "Hear me," she insisted. "If I were to find a single florin, and another were given to me besides, then I would borrow yet a third, and thou thyself shouldst add a fourth. With 4 florins in my hand, I would buy us a young cow." At this, Lawrence stirred, half dreaming, half listening. The picture of a cow grazing in the meadow was sweet to him, for he had long been without fresh milk. "A cow, sayest thou? That is a fair thought. Though I know not where thy florin is to be found, nor whence mine is to come, Still, if thou canst gather the money, it would please me well. And if the cow should give a calf, then I might drink of the milk and be refreshed. But Lisa's eyes flashed in the dark, and she cried, "Milk for thee? Nay, fool, the calf must have the milk. It must grow strong and fat, and then we shall sell it at a good price. Not a drop is for thee." Lawrence, still mild in temper, answered, "A little milk, wife, would do no harm. Surely there would be enough for us both." "Enough for thee?" she snapped. "What knowest thou of cows and calves? Thou wilt drink away the profit and leave me with nothing. Whether it harm or no harm, I tell thee plainly, not a single drop shalt thou taste, even if thou standest upon thy head for it. Dost thou think, because thou art never satisfied, Long Lawrence, that thou art to swallow the fruit of my cleverness and my labor?" Then did Lawrence, wearied of her sharp tongue, speak more sternly, "Peace, woman, or I shall silence thee with a blow upon the mouth." At that, Lisa shrieked, "What? Dost thou threaten me, thou glutton, thou scoundrel, thou good-for-nothing Harry, lazy as the day is long?" And with that, she stretched forth her withered hands and clutched at his hair, pulling so that he winced. But Lawrence, though slow, was strong. He rose from the bed in anger, caught both her thin arms in one of his great hands, and with the other he pressed her head deep into the pillow. And though she scolded and railed and cried out every insult she knew, he held her fast until, worn out by her own fury, she fell asleep at last. Whether she renewed her wrangling the next morning, or whether she slipped out into the lane to seek the florin her fancy had promised her, no one can tell. Some say she still roams with her broom and her schemes, never resting, always planning, forever dreaming of a cow that was never bought, a calf that was never born, and milk that was never drunk. And thus it is with lean Lisa, who scoured her house to dust, who worked her husband to bone, and yet for all her restless striving, came to nothing. Sharing joy and sorrow. Once upon a time, in a small town where the streets were narrow and the houses pressed close together, there lived a tailor. He was skilled enough with his needle and thread, and his hands could fashion coats and cloaks that fit a man as though they had grown upon him. Yet though his craft was nimble, his temper was hard, and his tongue was sharper than his scissors. He was, in truth, a quarrelsome fellow, and he bore within him little kindness for his wife. Now his wife was of a very different nature. she was gentle and pious, industrious from morning until night, and careful that her home should always be clean and ordered. She rose early with the first light, swept the floor, kindled the fire, and set the bread to bake, all before her husband had so much as rubbed the sleep from his eyes. She spoke little, but when she did, her words were soft and reasonable, seeking only to calm storms before they broke. Yet no matter what she did, she could not win her husband's favor. If she laid the table with care, he found fault with the bread. If she patched his coat with neat stitches, he mocked her for crooked seams. If she prayed, he scolded her for idleness. If she worked, he said she worked too slowly. And worse still, he often struck her, so that she bore not only sorrow in her heart, but bruises upon her skin. The neighbors saw and shook their heads, and at length the authorities heard whispers of his cruelty. They summoned the tailor, and for his harshness he was cast into prison. There he was fed on nothing but coarse bread and water, and he sat upon the cold stones and thought of his misdeeds. After some time had passed, the judges released him, hoping he had grown wiser. Yet before they let him go, they made him swear a solemn promise. Never again should he raise his hand against his wife, but he must live in peace with her, share joy and sorrow with her, and keep the bond of marriage as God had ordained. The tailor bowed and swore, for what else could he do? And he returned home. For a little while, things seemed better. He curbed his anger, and his wife dared to hope that her days of suffering were at an end. She went about her work with lighter steps, and even the neighbors said, "Perhaps the tailor has mended his ways." But evil habits are like deep-rooted weeds. Pull them up once, and they grow again with twice the strength. So it was with the tailor. Before long, his surliness returned, and because he feared to break his oath by striking her with his fists, he found new ways to torment her. When displeased, he seized her by the hair and tore it out in handfuls. When she fled from him, he pursued her into the yard, brandishing his yard measure like a cudgel and his long scissors like a dagger. He hurled them after her with cruel laughter, and when they struck her, he laughed for joy. But when they missed, he stormed and swore until the air rang with curses. This wicked game lasted so long that the poor woman could bear it no more. She cried out, and her neighbors, moved by pity, came running. They led her away from her husband's fury and brought the matter again before the magistrates. The tailor stood before the judges, his cap in hand, and they reminded him sternly of his oath. "Did you not promise," they said, "to live in peace with your wife and to harm her no more?" "Indeed, dear gentleman," answered the tailor with feigned humility, "I have kept my word. I have not beaten her, as you well know. I have shared joy and sorrow with her, as a husband must." The judges frowned. "How can this be," said one, "when your wife comes again and again with heavy complaints of your cruelty?" "Ah, learned sirs," replied the tailor, twisting his words as deftly as he twisted thread, "you do not understand. I have not beaten her. No, never with my fists. Only because she looked so strange at times, I wished to comb her hair with my hand. But she fled from me spitefully, as though she had been wronged. Then I, being her husband, hurried after her, and in order to bring her back to her duty, I threw at her whatever lay close at hand. My yard measure, my scissors, or what else the Lord provided. These were but well-meant admonitions. And as for sharing joy and sorrow, I have done so most faithfully. For whenever I struck her, I was full of joy, and she of sorrow. And when I missed her, then she was joyful, and I was sorry. Thus joy and sorrow have we shared alike, each in turn. When the judges heard this shameless excuse, they looked upon one another with grave faces. "This man twists words as he twists cloth," said the eldest. "He makes mockery of justice and torment of his wife." So they gave him not the freedom he desired, but the punishment he deserved. And the quarrelsome tailor was taught that neither wit nor cunning can hide wickedness forever. The Willow-Wren. In days long past, when the world still spoke, and every sound carried meaning, the hammer of the smith was never silent. Each blow rang like a voice upon the anvil, crying with all its strength, "Strike away! Strike away!" The carpenter's plane, when it rasped along the wood, seemed to chant, "Here goes! Here goes!" The mill wheel clacked and groaned, but even its weary sound was a prayer, murmuring, "Help, Lord God! Help, Lord God!" Yet when the miller was a rogue and left his mill to its own devices, the wheel took to speaking in a sharper tongue. Slowly and solemnly it would ask, "Who is there? Who is there?" Then quicker, in a low voice, "The miller! The miller!" And at last, in haste and mischief, it would rattle, "He steals bravely, he steals bravely, 3 pecks in a bushel." At that time, not only the tools of men had voices, but also the creatures of the air. The birds, great and small, spoke a language that every living soul could understand. Now we hear them only as chirps and screeches, whistles and caws, or at best, as music without words. In those elder days, however, their speech was clear as human tongue, and it so happened that the birds began to brood upon the thought of government, for they wished no longer to live scattered and free, but to choose from among themselves a sovereign who should be called their king. All consented to this save one, the green plover. He had long cherished his liberty and feared to see it lost. Fluttering anxiously, he cried, "Where shall I go? Where shall I go? I will live free, and I will die free." With beating wings, he vanished into a lonely marsh, where reeds whispered and no companions dwelt. And there he hid himself forever from his brethren. The others, meanwhile, gathered to council. And on a bright morning in May, when the dew still clung to every blade of grass, and the sun shone kindly upon wood and field, all the tribes of birds assembled together. From far and near they came, the proud eagles, the watchful owls, the solemn crows, the larks that love the morning, and the sparrows that chatter by the doors of men. Chaffinches sang their bright notes, while even the cuckoo left his solitary wandering, heralded by the hoopoe, his clerk, who is always heard a few days before. And mingled among them was a very small bird, nameless and overlooked, so tiny that few marked his presence. Now it chanced that the hen had heard nothing of this gathering. When she beheld such a multitude in one place, she lifted her head in alarm and cried, What is going to be done?" Her cock, who strutted beside her, soothed her fears. "Only the great and the wealthy decide such matters," he said with dignity, and told her what was planned. After much talk, it was agreed that he who could fly highest into the heavens should be chosen king. From the bushes, a tree frog croaked his warning. No, 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 no. For he foresaw sorrow and strife in the choosing. But the crow answered with a loud caw, caw, as though to say all would be well and peace would follow. So the contest began. A signal was given, and in that instant the whole host rose into the air. The earth was darkened with the dust of their wings, and the sky seemed filled with a black cloud, fluttering and whirring and rushing upward. Small birds soon grew weary, fell back, and dropped to the fields below. Larger birds held out longer, yet none could match the eagle. Higher and higher he mounted, until it seemed he might pluck the very eyes of the sun. Seeing that no rival could reach his height, he thought to himself, Why should I fly still higher? Am I not already king? And slowly, in triumph, he turned to descend. From beneath, the birds cried out, "Thou art our king, for none has flown so high as thou." But then, from the eagle's very breast feathers, there rose a shrill and piercing voice. It was the little bird without a name, who had hidden himself there unseen. Fresh and untired, he sprang upward with quick strokes, climbing far beyond the eagle, soaring until he touched the gates of heaven itself. Then he folded his wings and cried aloud in ringing tones, "I am king! I am king!" The company below grew wrathful. "Thou our king," they cried. "Nay, thou hast gained this by trick and cunning." So they set another trial. The crown should belong not only to the highest flyer, but to him who could also sink lowest into the earth. Once more, the contest began. The goose flapped with her broad breast and pushed against the ground. The cock scratched furiously and made a hole in the soil. The duck leapt into a ditch, but hurt her legs and limped away to a pond, crying, "Cheating, cheating!" But the nameless bird sought out a mouse hole, and slipping swiftly within, he called from the darkness, "I am king! I am king!" The anger of the birds grew hotter. "Dost thou think thy cunning shall prevail?" they shouted. And so they resolved to trap him where he was and starve him out. The owl, grave and silent, was set as sentinel before the hole, with strict command not to let the trickster escape if she valued her life. Evening fell. The birds, weary from their flights, went to rest with their mates and their young. Only the owl remained at her post, her great round eyes gazing steadfastly into the mouse hole. Long she watched, but drowsiness crept over her. "I will shut one eye," she thought, "and with the other I shall still keep guard." So she closed one eye and peered with the other. The little bird thrust out his head, saw her watching, and slipped back. Then the owl opened her shut eye and closed the other, intending to alternate thus all through the night. But in the end, she forgot to open one when she closed the other, and so fell fast asleep, with both eyes shut. The little bird, sharp and watchful, perceived this, and stealing softly, he crept out of the hole and flew away into the night. From that time forward, the owl has never dared show herself by daylight, for if she does, the other birds chase her and pluck out her feathers. She lives by night alone, and out of spite she hunts the mice because they made such convenient holes for her prisoner. And the little bird? He too keeps out of sight, fearing the vengeance of the great assembly. He hides in the hedges, and when he is sure of safety, he sometimes pipes in a small, proud voice, "I am king, I am king." So the others mock him and call him Zonkönig, the Hedge King. But of all the birds, none was more glad than the lark, who felt no need of rulers or crowns. Each morning, as the first light touched the earth, she rose singing into the sky, and her song was this: "Ah, how beautiful it is! Beautiful it is! Beautiful, beautiful! Ah, how beautiful it is!" And so the birds learned that trickery may seize a crown for a moment, but the joy of freedom sings louder and truer than any king's voice. The soul. Long ago, when the waters of river and lake still shimmered with untouched clarity, the fishes were not at peace with one another. Great disorder reigned in their kingdom beneath the waves, for each creature swam as it pleased, and none thought of yielding place to its neighbor. One glided to the right, another to the left. A third broke rudely between those who wished to keep together, and a fourth thrust itself forward into every narrow passage. The strong scorned the weak, striking them aside with cruel tails, or, if hunger came upon them, swallowing them in silence and without a thought. So it happened that murmurs spread through the waters. The little fishes whispered, the middling ones grumbled, and even the great and ancient carp raised his solemn head from the mud to complain. "It cannot go on so," said they one to another. "We live without order, without law, without justice. We are a people, yet no people. How delightful it would be if among us there were a king, one who could set the haughty in their place, shield the weak, and see that all swam in peace." When these words had been spoken often, the fishes grew bold and resolved to act. A great gathering was called at the shore, where reeds stood thick and dragonflies danced in the evening air. From far and wide they came, the sleek herring from the cold sea, the gudgeon from the brook, the perch with his red fins, the carp with his golden scales, the sharp-toothed pike who was feared by all, and even the flat and silent sole who usually lay hidden on the sandy bed. There they assembled in rows, as soldiers might do before a battle. The waves hushed as if listening, and the sun shone down like a watchful eye. Then the pike, whose strength none doubted, lifted his mighty tail and struck the water with a clap like a whip. "Let the race begin," cried all the fishes, and with that they darted forward. Like arrows loosed from many bows, they sped. The pike shot first, his jaws open, his body gleaming. After him, the herring flashed. The perch beat his fins furiously. The carp heaved his heavy bulk, and the gudgeon scurried with all the swiftness his small frame allowed. Even the sole roused himself, though sluggish and slow by nature, and dreamed of surprising them all by cunning. For a time they kept together, and the water churned as though a storm had risen. But little by little, one fell behind, another veered aside, a third lost breath. The carp, weary of his own weight, sank lower and lower. The perch grew tired of his endless fluttering. Only the herring pressed on, light and tireless, his silver sides flashing in the sun. Then a cry rang out across the water. "The herring is first. The herring has outstripped them all." Now the sole, who lay far behind, heard these words and burned with envy. He turned his flat face upward and cried, "Who is first? Who dares to be first before me?" "The herring, the herring," shouted all the fishes. "What? The naked herring?" screamed the sole, for spiteful was his heart. "Shall such a bare, unarmored creature wear the crown of the waters?" His cry was so bitter and so full of malice that the very waves echoed it. And from that day forth, the mouth of the sole was drawn awry, twisted to one side as if forever sneering at his neighbor. It was given to him as a punishment, so that all who look upon him may know what comes of envy and ill will. For though the fishes had sought a king to rule with justice, discord sprang up once more among them. And to this very hour, the kingdom of the waters has never been free of quarrel. The Bittern and the Hoopoe. A traveler once came upon an old cowherd who sat at the edge of a meadow, his staff resting across his knees, his flock grazing peacefully around him. The traveler, weary of his wandering, paused and said, "Tell me, good father, where do you most love to pasture your cattle? Where in all these wide fields is the best place to feed them?" The cowherd raised his wrinkled face, brown from sun and wind, and answered with slow and careful words, "Here, sir, precisely here, where the grass is neither too rich nor too poor. For if the pasture gives too much, or if it gives too little, then the flock comes to harm, and all labor is in vain." The traveler marveled at this reply, and curious asked, "Why so? Why should rich grass be a danger, or poor grass a sorrow? Is not plenty always better than want?" The cowherd shook his head and leaned upon his staff. "Do you not hear that mournful cry echoing across the meadow yonder?" he said, From the far reeds came a hollow, sorrowful call. That, my lord, is the bittern. He was once a shepherd like myself. And do you hear upon the dry hillside the sharp and restless cry of another bird? That is the hoopoe. He too once kept cattle. I will tell you their story, for it is a tale of warning passed down through many generations. In days long past, when men still spoke with the creatures of the earth, the bittern was a young shepherd. He was eager and proud, and he thought the best pasture must be where the meadows were most splendid. So he led his cows to the richest fields, where the grass grew thick and emerald, where the daisies and buttercups gleamed like scattered stars, and where streams wound clear and shining through the earth. At first, the cows grew sleek and fat, their hides shining in the sun. Yet soon, because they ate only of abundance, they grew restless, wild, and full of mischief. Their horns clashed, their hooves stamped, and they no longer heeded the shepherd's crook. When evening came, and the sky reddened in the west, the bittern tried to gather them together. He called with all his strength, "Come, cows, come home." But the cattle tossed their heads and ran scattering across the meadow. They had grown too high-spirited, too unruly, and they no longer cared for his voice. All night, the poor shepherd wandered, crying after them, and all night they fled from him, untamed and heedless. Now the hoopoe was another shepherd, and he thought the opposite way. He scorned the green valleys and said, "Strength is forged by hardship. My cattle shall be hardy as the rocks themselves." So he drove his herd onto the barren hills, where no flowers grew, where the wind whistled sharp and lonely, and the sand drifted over the stones. Day after day, the cows found little to eat. Their ribs showed through their sides, their steps faltered, and their strength ebbed away. When the sun set and the time came to lead them home, the hoopoe lifted his voice and cried, "Up, up, up, my cows! Rise, rest and follow me." But they were too weak. They lay upon the cold ground and would not move, though he shouted until his throat was hoarse. His herd, too, was lost to him, not through excess, but through want. Thus it happened that both shepherds failed. One because he knew no measure in plenty, the other because he knew no kindness in hardship. For where there is no moderation, neither abundance nor barrenness can bring good. And so, as a sign and a punishment, both were changed. The first became the bittern, who to this very day cries from the marshes, "Come, cows, come, come, come," calling in vain for a flock that will never return. The second became the hoopoe, who forever cries from the hilltops, up, 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 urging weary beasts that can never rise. The cowherd finished his tale and looked gravely at the traveler. That, sir, is why I pasture my cattle here, where the grass is neither too rich nor too poor. For in the middle way lies peace, and he who tends his flock with measure will not be left crying in vain as the birds do. The traveler nodded slowly, for he saw the wisdom in the story. And as the evening fell, the mournful call of the bittern and the shrill cry of the hoopoe sounded across the fields, like an old sorrow woven into the very air of the land. The owl. 200 or 300 years ago, when men and women still lived in simpler ways, and when craftiness and clever tricks were not so common as they are today, there occurred a most curious happening in a small town, ringed about with fields, orchards, and dark woods. It was a town where every villager knew his neighbor's footsteps, and where the tolling of the bell at dawn and dusk was the surest guide of time. One night, while the moon stood high above the gables and the watchman still called the hours, a strange visitor came from the shadowy forest. It was a horned owl, a great, solemn bird, wide of wing, heavy of feather, with eyes like glowing embers. By mischance, or by restless wandering, the owl had flown into the barn of a certain townsman. And once there, as daylight crept into the sky, she dared not fly back out. For in daylight, all the smaller birds, who fear and hate the owl, would have raised such a clamoring mob against her that she might never have escaped alive. So she settled herself on a dark beam in the loft and waited, silent and still, her round eyes rolling in her head. In the morning, the master's servant went into the barn to fetch straw for the cattle. But as soon as his gaze fell on the motionless figure in the corner, his heart nearly leapt from his chest. He thought he beheld not a bird, but some dreadful monster from out of fairy tales, a beast with vast staring eyes, large enough to swallow a man at a gulp. With cries of terror, he threw down his fork, ran from the place, and stammered to his master that an unspeakable creature crouched in the barn, rolling its eyes and waiting to devour whomever came near. The master laughed at first, for he knew his servant to be a timid fellow, bold enough to chase sparrows in the field, but fearful even of a hen lying dead in the dust. "I must see this marvel myself," he said, and strode out with bravado. Yet when his own eyes beheld the grim shape upon the beam, his courage faltered, and his knees knocked together as though struck by winter's cold. With 2 leaps, he was out of the barn again, his face pale, his breath sharp. At once, he ran to the neighbors, crying that some wild and dangerous beast had crept into his barn, and that if it broke loose, the whole town might come to ruin. Word spread swiftly, for rumor has wings swifter than any owl, and soon the entire street rang with alarm. Housewives peered from windows, children were driven indoors, and men seized whatever weapons lay at hand. Spears left from old campaigns, scythes, hayforks, and axes. They gathered in a swarm, as if marching against an army. The senators of the town came as well, grave in their gowns, with the burgomaster at their head, for they feared this menace might become a public peril. When all were assembled in the marketplace, they drew up in order, then advanced with caution to the barn. They surrounded it as soldiers would an enemy fortress. Silence fell, broken only by the stamping of feet and the low murmur of prayers. At length, one courageous fellow stepped forward with his spear lowered. With measured breath, he entered the dark barn. But scarcely had he glimpsed the dreadful figure than he burst out again, white as chalk, shrieking and unable to form a word. Another tried, then a third, but each returned no braver than the last. Murmurs ran through the crowd, fear mounting like floodwater. Then came forth a great, strong man, famed in the town for his boldness and the blows he had struck in war. He scoffed at the others, calling them no better than frightened maidens. "You will not banish a monster with staring and sighs," said he. "Give me arms, and I will rid the town of this fiend." They brought him a stout sword and a strong spear, and he girded himself with armor as the people praised his valor, though many whispered that he would not leave the barn alive. The barn doors were thrown wide. All eyes turned upward, and there sat the owl, her feathers bristling, her eyes burning in the half-dark, perched on the great crossbeam. A ladder was brought, and the champion began to climb, step by step. The people cried to him to be brave, and commended him to St. George, who slew the dragon. The air quivered with expectation, but the owl, frightened by the multitude and the gleam of steel, grew restless. She rolled her eyes, shook her wings, snapped her beak, and gave forth a harsh cry. "To hit! To who?" The sound echoed so dreadfully that the hearts of all who heard it froze in their breasts. "Strike! Strike!" the people shouted to their hero. "Strike, say you!" cried he, trembling where he stood on the ladder. "Any man who stood where I now stand would not call so loudly for the blow." He raised one foot to the next rung, but his courage melted like wax before the fire. Pale and gasping, he climbed down again and could not be persuaded to mount once more. Now terror seized the crowd. "The monster," they whispered, "has poisoned the bravest among us with a single cry. Its very breath strikes men down. Shall we all risk death?" None dared enter again. The senators and burgomaster took counsel. Long did they argue, while the people pressed around in fear. At last the burgomaster rose and spoke. "My judgment is this. Let us not endanger more lives. We will pay the owner of this barn from the town purse for all his straw, hay, and corn. Then we shall set fire to the building and consume the beast with it. Better to lose one barn than the whole town." The people, who had no wish to face the monster themselves, agreed at once. So they laid fire at the four corners of the barn. Flames rose high, crackling and roaring, and before long, the whole building was swallowed by fire, and with it, the poor owl, who might have flown free in the night, was miserably burned to ashes. And if any man doubt this tale, let him go to that town and inquire for himself. For the people there will tell him still of the terrible monster that once sat in a barn, and how the whole town was set in uproar over a poor horned owl. The duration of life. In the earliest dawn of days, when the world was still young, and the rivers had only just carved their courses, God in his wisdom looked upon the creatures he had made. And it pleased him to order all things, not only the sun and stars, but also the span of life for every beast that walked, and every bird that flew, and at last for man himself. Then the creatures came before him, one after another, each desiring to hear the measure of its days. First of all, the ass came forth, slow of step, with long ears drooping and eyes downcast, for he already foresaw what manner of life was appointed him. The Lord said kindly, "Ass, 30 years shall be thine. 30 harvests shalt thou see. 30 winters shalt thou endure. Is that good in thy sight?" Then the ass groaned and bent his head to the ground. "Lord," said he, "pardon my boldness, but 30 years is far too much for me. Think of my lot. I am to bear heavy burdens from sunrise until nightfall, to stagger under sacks of grain that others may eat bread, to suffer hunger and thirst while men smite me with sticks and with whips, and to find my rest only in blows and kicks. What joy is there in so long an existence? Shorten it, I beg thee, shorten it, for I shall not endure." And God, who is merciful, took pity on the poor beast of burden. "So be it," said he. "I relieve thee of 18 years. 12 shall be thy portion, and no more." Then the ass went away comforted, his ears flicking with a little cheerfulness, for his days would not be endless toil. After him came the dog, trotting lightly, his tail wagging, yet his eyes anxious, for he too desired a fair measure of years. God said, "Faithful dog, 30 years shalt thou live, as I have set for the ass." But the dog whined and crouched low at his feet. "Lord, consider my strength. For a long time I must run with fleet foot, guarding house and field, chasing game through forest and meadow. But 30 years, my paws will fail, my breath will grow short, my teeth will fall out, and my voice will no longer bark with courage. Then I shall lie useless in a corner, growling but unable to bite, despised by master and stranger alike. Shorten it, O Lord, for such a span is too long for a creature like me." Then God, seeing that the dog spoke truly, cut away 12 years. 18 years shalt thou live, he said, and no more. The dog bowed his head, and though he still whined a little, he departed more content than before. Then came the monkey, leaping and grimacing, a bundle of restless mirth. God smiled at him and said, "Thou, lively one, wilt surely be glad of 30 years. Thou hast no heavy burdens as the ass, nor unending tasks as the dog. Thou wilt play and frolic, and all will laugh at thee. Surely 30 years shall not seem too long." But the monkey made a wry face and shook his head. "Lord, it is not as easy as it appears. Men laugh at me indeed, but seldom in kindness. They set me to foolish tricks and make sport of my grimaces. They give me an apple, and lo, it is sour. They bid me play pranks, yet I tire of being their jest. When porridge rains from the sky, I have no spoon. Beneath my capering lies weariness, and sadness often hides behind my mirth. 30 years of this. Never. Take some away, I pray thee." So the Lord, who knows all hearts, granted his petition. 10 years I remove from thee. 20 shalt thou live, but no more. The monkey bowed, somersaulted once in thanks, and bounded away into the trees. At last came man himself, upright and strong, his face glowing with health, his step firm upon the earth. He looked to heaven and said, "O Lord, appoint my days also, that I may know how long I shall dwell upon the earth." God spoke, 30 years shalt thou live, 30 springs shall thy eyes behold, 30 harvests shall thy hands gather. Art thou content with this? But man lifted his hands in dismay. Lord, what a short time, when at last I have built my house, and the hearth burns bright with my fire, when I have planted trees, and they blossom and bear fruit, when I am ready to taste the sweetness of life, then must I die? Surely, Lord, it is too little. Grant me more. The Lord said, So be it. I will add unto thee the 18 years that I took from the ass. But man cried, Still too short, O Lord, give me yet more. Then God said, I will grant thee the 12 years that I took from the dog. Yet man shook his head. Not enough, O Lord, not enough. So the Lord answered, Then take also the 10 years that I took from the monkey. But more thou shalt not have. Thus man departed with 70 years in all. Yet even then he was not satisfied, for the heart of man ever hungers after more. And so it has remained from that day to this. Man lives 70 years. The first 30 are his true human years, swift and golden, filled with strength, with joy, with labor that is sweet and fruitful. He builds his house, tends his fields, delights in wife and child, and is glad of the world. Then follow the ass's 18 years. Burdens are laid upon him, one after another. He bends beneath the load, carries corn and timber, works not for himself, but for others, and oftentimes receives no thanks, but only weariness and harsh reward. After these come the dog's 12 years. Then he grows old, toothless, and feeble. He lies in a corner, grumbles at the world, and has little strength left but to growl, while others pass him by. And last of all are the monkey's 10 years. Then man becomes foolish once again. He loses his senses, makes childish jests, plays silly tricks, and is mocked by children as once the monkey was. His head shakes, his steps falter, and he becomes a shadow of what he once was. Thus do the 70 years of man pass away, each portion marked by the life of the beasts whose years he has borrowed. Death's messengers. In the days of old, when the earth was young, and men had not yet filled all its fields and valleys, there walked a giant upon a broad highway. His steps were long, his shadow vast, and all creatures fled before him, for he was mighty and terrible to behold. His stride shook the ground, and the trees bent as he passed. But as he went his way, suddenly there sprang up before him a man, unknown and small in stature, who lifted his hand and cried in a clear voice, "Halt! Not one step farther." The giant laughed so loud that the hills echoed. "What is this?" he roared. "A creature no larger than a twig dares to bar my road? With but 2 fingers I could crush thee into dust. Who art thou, that thou darest speak so boldly?" "I am Death," answered the stranger, and his voice was as cold as the grave. "No one resists me. Kings bow their crowned heads, peasants drop their sickles, children leave their play, and maidens their song when I command. Thou also must obey me." But the giant, whose pride was greater than his wisdom, would not submit. "Thou thinkest to rule over all, not over me," he said, and with that he struck at Death with his mighty hands. Then began a fierce struggle, such as the earth had seldom seen. Death was swift and cunning, but the giant was strong and stubborn. Long they strove together upon the road, until the dust rose in clouds, and the sky darkened with their struggle. At last the giant dealt Death a blow so heavy that he fell senseless beside a stone. And there he lay, pale and faint, unable to rise. The giant, proud of his victory, strode on with great strides, and thought no more of the matter. But Death lay upon the ground, conquered and weak, and whispered to himself, "What will come of this if I remain here helpless? No man, no beast, no bird will perish. The world will be filled till no space is left to stand or breathe. The sick will groan forever, the weary will find no rest, and the old will wither, yet not die. Oh, woe unto all creation, if I, Death, lie vanquished." While he lamented, there came along the road a young man, fresh of face, strong of limb, and light of heart. He sang a song as he walked, and his eyes glanced cheerfully to the fields and sky. When he beheld the faint figure lying by the stone, pity seized him. He bent down, raised the fallen one, and held his flask to his lips, that he might drink and be strengthened. Gently he waited till the stranger gathered his breath again. Then Death lifted his head and said, "Dost thou know whom thou hast aided? Dost thou understand who it is that thou hast set upon his feet again?" "No," answered the youth simply, "I know thee not." "I am Death," said the pale one, and his eyes shone with a strange light. "I spare no one. Kings and beggars, young and old, all must follow me when I beckon, nor can I make exception for thee. Yet, because thou hast shown me kindness when I lay low, I will deal fairly with thee. I promise that I shall not come upon thee unawares, as I do with many others. I will send messengers before me, that thou mayest know of my approach. The youth thought to himself, "It is something gained, that I shall be warned before my end. For so long I may live merrily and fear nothing." And he went his way, singing more loudly than before, for his heart was light. Thus he lived for a time in joy, thinking not of the pale figure he had helped. But youth and health are flowers that fade quickly. Sicknesses came, stealing his strength, and sorrows visited him in the night. Fevers burned in his blood. His head grew dizzy, and sharp pains tormented his limbs. Then he sighed and said, "Surely I shall not die, for death promised his messengers would come first. But I wish these wretched days of suffering were done." When health returned, he forgot his misery and lived again in laughter and song. Yet sickness returned often, and sorrow sat long by his hearth. Still, he said, "This is not death, for he has not yet sent his messengers to call me." At last, one quiet evening, as he sat alone, someone touched him on the shoulder. He turned, and there stood Death himself, tall and silent, and said, "Follow me, for thy hour is come." The man started back in fear. "How is this? Thou breakest thy word. Didst thou not vow to send me messengers before thy coming? I have seen none." Then Death's face grew stern, and he spoke, "Silence! Have I not sent messenger after messenger to thee? Did not fever smite thee and shake thy frame? Did not dizziness bewilder thy head, and gout seize thy limbs? Did not thine ears ring and sing, and toothache bite cruelly into thy cheeks? Did not thy sight grow dim till the world was darkness before thine eyes? And beyond all these, did not my brother sleep visit thee every night, and lay thee down as one already dead? What are these, if not my faithful heralds?" The man's lips were closed, for he could give no answer. He knew the truth of Death's words, and his heart failed within him. He bowed his head, yielded to his fate, and went away with Death into the shadows from which none return. And thus it is with all men. The messengers of Death go before him, though few take heed, until he himself lays his hand upon their shoulder. Master Pfriem, Master Cobbler's all. Master Pfriem was a little man, thin as a stick, yet restless as a squirrel, who could not sit still for the length of a sigh. His face was pale as though the blood had long abandoned it, and pockmarks scarred his skin like tiny pits dug by cruel hands. A hooked nose, turned sharply upward, jutted from his face as the one clear landmark. His hair, gray and bristling like uncombed straw, hung about his temples in disorder. His eyes were small, but quick as sparks. They darted to the left, to the right, above, beneath. Nothing escaped them. He spied everything, judged everything, believed he knew all things better than any other, and never, not once, admitted himself in the wrong. When he walked abroad in the streets, he flung his arms about as if he were rowing a boat upon invisible waters, so that people were forced to leap aside. Once, he struck against a poor maid who carried a pail of water. The vessel flew into the air, and the flood came down again over Pfriem himself, soaking him from head to toe. Instead of laughing at his own clumsiness, he stamped and shook himself like a wet dog, crying out, "Stupid creature! Could you not see that I was coming behind you?" By craft, he was a shoemaker, and when he bent to his work, he tugged the thread with such force that his fists flew into the ribs of any who stood too near. His apprentices did not stay long with him. The very best boys who stitched neatly and shaped the leather true endured scarcely a month, for Pfriem always discovered fault where no fault could be found. One day, the stitches were uneven. The next, the heel too high. Another time, the leather too narrow, or the toe too long. If a lad dared answer, Pfriem would fetch his strap, saying, "I will soften thy hide as I soften leather," and laid the strokes on his back. He called every one of them sluggard, fool, or blockhead. He himself finished little, for before a shoe was half done, he had sprung from his bench, unfastened his apron, and rushed out to scold the world. If his good wife rose early and kindled the morning fire, he would leap out of bed barefoot, run into the kitchen, and cry, "Would you roast an ox in my house? Do you fancy wood costs nothing? You will burn us out before the day has dawned." If the maids, standing by their tubs, chattered and laughed, Pfriem stormed at them. There cackle the geese, forgetting their washing, fresh soap again, disgraceful waste. You would save your white hands and spare the scrubbing, idle hussies. And in his rage, he would seize a pail and overturn it, so that suds and water ran across the floor like a flood. If a neighbor raised a new house, Pfriem must needs hurry to the window and cry, "Fools, they build again with that red sandstone that never dries. Mark me, no one will be healthy there. And look, see how badly the blocks are laid. The mortar is worthless too. There should be gravel in it, not mere sand. That house will tumble upon their heads, and I shall live to say, 'I told you so.'" Then he would put 2 stitches into his work, jump up again, and rush forth, crying, I will appeal to the consciences of those bunglers." On the way, he met carpenters. "What's this?" he shouted. "You measure not by the line. Do you expect straight beams from crooked cuts? All wrong. One mistake spoils the whole." He snatched the axe from a man's hand to show him how it should be done. But lo, a cart creaked past, heaped with clay. Pfriem flung the axe aside and ran to the peasant. "Madman," he cried, "who yokes young horses to so heavy a load? The beasts will die upon the spot." The peasant said nothing, and Pfriem, foaming with anger, rushed home to his bench. When he sat again, his apprentice brought him a shoe. "What monstrosity is this?" screamed Pfriem. "Have I not told thee never to cut shoes so broad? Who would buy such a slab of sole? I command my orders be followed to the letter." The lad answered meekly, "Master, the shoe is truly ill cut, yet it is the one you yourself shaped before you leapt up and knocked it to the floor." But picked it up. But Master Pfriem would sooner believe the sky was green than admit such a thing. That night, Pfriem dreamed he was dead and journeyed to heaven. He came to the gate and knocked so loudly that the sound echoed far. "Strange," thought he, "that they have no knocker here. One bruises his knuckles." St. Peter himself opened, asking who made so rude a clamor. "Ah, Master Pfriem," said he, "you may enter, but mark this, in heaven you must hold your tongue and find fault with nothing, else it will go ill with you." "Your warning is needless," answered Pfriem proudly. "Here, thank God, all is perfect. Unlike the earth, there is nothing to blame." He walked in, gazing to left and right, shaking his head now and then, muttering under his breath. 2 angels passed by, bearing a great beam, the very beam once lodged in the eye of a man who hunted for splinters in his brother's eye. They carried it slantwise, not lengthways. Never was such stupidity seen, thought Pfriem, but bit his tongue. Well, straight or crooked, so long as they get along with it. Soon he spied angels drawing water from a well, yet the bucket was full of holes, and the water streamed out on every side. With it, they watered the earth below. "Fools," he almost cried, but checking himself, he muttered, "Perhaps it is mere pastime. Even in heaven, they idle away the hours with trifles." Farther on, he beheld a cart stuck fast in a deep rut. A man stood by it with a load of good wishes. "Small wonder it is mired," said Pfriem. "Such stuff cannot travel the right road." An angel came and harnessed 2 horses. "Better so," thought Pfriem. "But 2 will never draw it out. 4 at least are needed. Another angel came with 2 more, yet harnessed them behind the cart, not before it. At this, Pfriem burst out, "Clumsy blockhead! Has any man since the world began seen a cart drawn from behind? You think yourself wise, but you are a fool." He would have railed further, but a strong hand seized his throat, thrust him out the gate, and cast him down. As he turned his head for a last look, he saw the cart lifted into the air by 4 winged horses, soaring like eagles. At that moment, Master Pfriem awoke. He rubbed his eyes and muttered, "Things in heaven are managed otherwise than on earth, that I must allow. Yet who could see horses harnessed both before and behind, and keep silence? Wings indeed. But what folly to fix wings upon a beast that has legs enough already. I must rise, else they will blunder again in my house. Fortunate it is for me that I am not truly dead." Eve's various children. When Adam and Eve were driven forth from the gates of paradise, the flaming sword of the cherubim flashing behind them, they wandered sorrowfully until they came to a barren and stony place where no tree bore fruit, and the earth yielded nothing save thorns and thistles. There they were compelled to build for themselves a poor dwelling and to earn their bread in the sweat of their brow. Adam, strong though wearied, dug into the stubborn ground with his spade, breaking clods from sunrise until nightfall, while Eve sat spinning flax with patient hands, her heart heavy with memory of the lost garden. Each year, as time passed on, Eve brought forth a child into the world. Yet the children were not alike. Some were comely and fair to behold, with bright eyes and golden hair, their faces shining with gentleness and grace. But others were misshapen and rough, with crooked limbs, darkened skin, and features that seemed harsh to look upon. Still, Eve loved them all, for each was the fruit of her travail, though her heart at times leaned more tenderly toward the fair than the homely. Now, after many years had gone by, the Lord God, who is merciful and just, sent an angel to them with a message. "Prepare thy house, for the heavenly Father himself will come down to behold how thou livest, and how thou carest for the offspring given thee." At these words, Eve's heart leapt with joy. "What grace is this, that the Lord of heaven will enter beneath my roof?" she cried. Straightway, she began to cleanse her poor cottage. With untiring hands, she swept and scrubbed every corner, decked the walls with meadow flowers, and strewed reeds freshly cut upon the floor, so that the place might appear sweet and fair. Then she called in her children, but only those that were beautiful in form and face. These She bathed in clear water until their skin shone, combed their hair until it glistened like silk, and clothed them in clean raiment. She taught them how to stand before the Lord with quiet and modest bearing, to bow low, to stretch forth their hands humbly, and to answer with words soft and sensible. But as for the children who were ugly and rough, she would not suffer them to be seen. One she thrust beneath the hay in the shed. Another she drove up into the rafters. A third she hid in the straw. A fourth she shut in the stove. A fifth she sent down into the cellar. A sixth she thrust beneath a tub. A seventh beneath the wine cask. An eighth she wrapped under an old fur cloak. The ninth and 10th she concealed beneath the coarse cloth out of which she was wont to fashion garments. And the 11th and 12th she pushed under the leather from which Adam cut their shoes. Thus she thought to keep them far from the sight of the Lord, lest his eyes should fall harshly upon them. Scarcely was all prepared when there came a knock at the door, solemn and strong. Adam looked through a crack, and when he beheld who stood without, he trembled, for it was the Lord himself. With reverence, Adam opened the door wide, and the Heavenly Father entered. There, in a row, stood the fair children, washed and shining, bowing before him, stretching forth their hands, and kneeling low upon the floor. The Lord smiled gently and laid his hand upon the first, saying, "Thou shalt be a mighty king." To the second he said, "Thou shalt be a prince." To the third, "Thou a count." To the fourth, "Thou a knight." To the fifth, "Thou a nobleman." To the sixth, "Thou a burgher." To the seventh, "Thou a merchant." To the eighth, "Thou a man learned in wisdom." And with each word he poured rich blessings upon them, so that they were filled with honor. When Eve beheld how mild and gracious was the Lord, she said within herself, "Surely his mercy is great. Perhaps he will also look kindly on those poor little ones whom I have hidden away." So she hastened and brought them forth one after another from their hiding places, out of the hay, the straw, the stove, the cellar, the cask, the cloak, the cloth, and the leather. At last, the whole rude, dirty, sooty, and ragged company stood before the Lord. Then the Heavenly Father looked on them also with a smile, for his heart is full of compassion. He laid his hand on the first and said, "Thou shalt be a peasant, to till the ground." To the second, "Thou a fisherman, casting thy nets upon the waters." To the third, "Thou a smith, striking iron upon the anvil." To the fourth, "Thou a tanner, making leather from hide. To the fifth, thou a weaver, spinning cloth upon the loom. To the sixth, thou a shoemaker, shaping soles for the feet of men. To the seventh, thou a tailor, cutting garments for all folk. To the eighth, thou a potter, forming vessels of clay. To the ninth, thou a wagoner, guiding beasts and cart. To the 10th, thou a sailor, voyaging upon the seas. To the 11th, thou an errand boy, running hither and thither. And to the 12th, he said, thou shalt be a scullion, serving in the kitchen all thy days. When Eve heard these words, she was troubled in her heart, and she said, Lord, how unequally dost thou divide thy gifts? For after all, they are all my children, whom I bore in pain and sorrow. Should not thy favor be given alike to each? But the Lord answered with wisdom, Eve, thou art blinded by thy mother's love. It is needful that the whole world be furnished from thy offspring. If all were princes and lords, who then should plow the field, thresh the grain, grind the meal, and bake the bread? Who should forge the iron, weave the cloth, shape the shoes, and build the houses? Who should sail the seas, carry burdens, and labor with his hands? Each shall have his place and calling, so that one may uphold another, and all together be fed, even as the limbs of one body minister each to the other. Then Eve bowed her head humbly and answered, Ah, Lord, forgive my foolish speech. Thy wisdom is higher than my thoughts. Do with my children according to thy holy will. And the Lord departed, leaving peace upon the house of Adam and Eve. And from that day forth, the children of men were divided into high and low, mighty and humble, yet each needful to the other, that the earth might be filled, and all mankind sustained.